transportation on battery electric buses on our MBTA, red line and green line and all the lines of the MBTA, and then also on our water in boats that are not polluting the air. That's ultimately our goal. Some of the challenges we face is a little bit still on the desire of the state, the MBTA when it comes to buses, the state in general when it comes to things like ferries and the commitment to battery electric buses. That's a challenge that we face. The finances is a challenge that we face. Again, hopefully we'll get some federal money to help us with that. But the MBTA as a system, as a whole, it faces some real uncertainty right now as to what the ridership going forward will look like. I've had some conversations with the former secretary who's down in Washington, Stephanie Pollock, about coming out of the pandemic and the state of emergency and using this as an opportunity not to return to public transportation as we knew it, but to move towards public transportation as we would like to see it. That we should take this as an opportunity to move people or to steer people towards transportation that is cleaner and better for our environment than some of the systems that we presently use. To get people out of their cars on our public transportation in particular, and then within our public transportation, what are those modes of transportation that are most reliable, cost effective, and least polluting? And if we focus and move people towards those, then we will create a transportation network that really plays a role in addressing our longer term climate plan. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think it's a very, very exciting time to be talking about this. And when we look at the leadership in Washington finally talking about climate again, when we see what the legislature and the governor have done relative to setting forth a roadmap, and then you see some of the initiatives that are happening here at the local level, it's exciting. And I recognize fully that while it's exciting and it represents great progress, it's not fast enough. And our goal is to keep pushing so that we get where we have to go so much sooner and much rather than later, and that we continue to play that leadership role here in the South Shore, Massachusetts as a leader in the nation, and then the United States as a leader in the world. So exciting times. And I thank you for your involvement. I can tell you that when we had the public meetings relative to the bus facility in Quincy, the MBTA moved relative to their thoughts and their commitment to battery electric buses as a result of the input that they got from the meetings, and particularly the input that you folks offered. Again, maybe not fast enough, but it was impactful. And I've noticed a change at the MBTA as a result. So I want to say thank you for what you do. Please keep doing it. And I look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks for being here. Thanks for always taking our meetings, and thanks for appreciating our pushing, because I know we like to push, but you're always good humored and helpful about it. And thank you again for your time tonight. It's time. I'm going to turn this over to the Transit Matter folks. I'm going to start unmuting. Rob, you can unmute yourself. Transit Matters, take it away. Thank you for being here as well.
Of course. Is my audio okay, by the way? Okay, great. All right. So
if it can be louder, that would be even better.
Okay, I'll try. All right. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for setting this up and for having us. My name is Rob Canada. I am a member of Transit Matters, and I'm here with three other Transit Matters colleagues. Jay Flynn, who is the bus team lead, Ethan Finlan, who is the lead for the regional rail team, and also Jackson Moore-Otto is here. He is one of the co-leads on the bus projects. As for myself,
you got all the big guns.
All the big guns, yeah. So as for myself, I've been volunteering with Transit Matters for a couple of years now, and I am the South Shore co-lead. So specifically about Quincy and environs. So I just wanted to uh, note. So for Senator Keenan, I think the one of the things you said that taking an opportunity not to think about transit as we have had it, but what it could be, right? I think that is the core of what Transit Matters is all about. A lot of our work is about um, thinking towards the future of transportation, what the state needs, what the region needs. And we're going to talk about how that impacts specifically Quincy today. So, all right, so I will share my screen and uh, then we will get started. Okay, can everybody see the slides? Are we good?
See him.
Excellent.
Great. All right. So let's just get started. So what we want to talk about today, obviously we are going to talk quite a bit about the bus situation, but we're talking about Quincy's transit situation and how electrifying it as a whole can benefit the city and the region in general. So a little bit about Transit Matters, who we are. So we are not the T. We are an advocacy organization. We really focus on improving the transit situation in and around Boston. We are a group of advocates, and we try to bring a level of technical analysis to the discussion. So one of the things we try to do is looking at what the issues and problems are, but also proposing what solutions might be. One of the big things that we do is we look at national and global best practices. So what are agencies doing around the country? What are transit agencies doing in other countries? And what can we learn from those examples? And we try to bring that to our Boston-based advocacy. So let's talk a little bit about where Quincy is right now. So when it comes to the electrifying situation, so there are 3 transit modes that pass through Quincy. So bus, commuter rail, and the Red Line subway. Only one of those is electric as of now. The buses run on diesel. The commuter rail also runs on diesel, and we're going to talk a bit about commuter rail today. And the Red Line is electric, so 1 out of 3 is not bad. But as the senator had mentioned, and I'm sure many of you are aware, the MBTA is going to be constructing a new garage at the old Lowe's site, and that they have from the beginning talked about this being built for the specifications of electric buses. The exact timeline for when electric buses will arrive has been a matter of debate. There have been some recent changes in what the proposed timeline has been, but it's hasn't exactly been clear when that's going to be arriving. As far as the commuter rail, so when I've talked about this topic with a lot of people in Quincy, sometimes people are confused about why I bring up the commuter rail because not many people in Quincy really use it. They don't really, I think because we have the Red Line, we tend to just think in terms of if I want to take a train into Boston, I'm just going to take the Red Line, right? The idea of using the commuter rail just doesn't really enter into people's minds all that often. And there are some reasons for that. It hasn't had the most reliable history. The schedule hasn't always been very consistent. And as I said before, it's a diesel operation. Now, as far as the Red Line, we're not going to talk a ton about the Red Line tonight, mainly because it's already electric, so that's great. But also, one of the main things is just the Red Line really the main thing to say about it is that more frequency is better. Um, so there's been a lot of analysis and discussion of the red line since the red line is, you know, very has had very heavy traffic historically and some operational issues. But there has been discussion of ways to get more trains running on a tighter schedule. So very often in Quincy, you're going to be looking at a red line train every 6 to 12 minutes. Um, Ideally, you would want to get that to probably 6-minute service consistently. Um, and there are, with signal, some work on, the signaling, some of the changes for the newer trains that are slowly coming online. We are expecting there will be some real gains in red line capacity in the future. Uh, so, but we're going to mostly talk about buses and commuter rail today. So, why electrify? Since I know a lot of folks here are very climate oriented, I know I don't have to do a whole lot of selling on this point. But there are actual operational reasons why electrification is good beyond the environmental piece that we want to talk about. But of course, the cleaner air is a huge benefit in and of itself. The diesel operations create greenhouse gases, they fill the neighborhoods with particulate matter, and they're noisy, right? They create a lot of noise pollution, both when they're traveling, but also if they're idling. So if you happen to live in an area where buses might be parked for a bit, you're going to be listening to a lot of idling diesel engines. This is especially the emissions issue is especially important when you look at Metro Boston in general. The asthma rates in Metro Boston are quite high compared to other state and national averages. And air pollution, we know about the impact on the lungs, but it's also worth mentioning that there are heart disease, stroke, cognitive and memory issues are also correlated with heavy levels of air pollution. So there are plenty of just from an environmental and public health perspective, these are some serious gains. But from the service perspective, there are other really good reasons to electrify service. So the picture I've chosen here is not from the Boston area. This is from Japan, and this is one of the high-speed trains, the Shinkansen system. And if you notice, there's lots of wires everywhere. The high-speed rail systems, in places that have really good high-speed rail, it is all electric service, and there are very good operational reasons for that. So one big reason is that it's more reliable. An electric vehicle has fewer moving parts in general, and they break down less often. They accelerate better than a diesel operations, generally speaking. So because the way an electric motor works, it can have sort of an instant on torque that allows you to pull out of a station faster, which if you think about a bus, how often a bus stops and starts, all those seconds will start to add up. And also for a train, stopping a train takes a while, and getting a train fully up to speed also takes a while. So the more acceleration you have, the better when it comes to, number one, getting places faster, but also schedule discipline. If your vehicles are more reliable, they don't break down as often, and they have better performance, this means that any unexpected delays they can recover from. Well, number one, you have fewer delays in general because things don't break down as often. And number two, for all of those little unavoidable 1 or 2 minute delays that just happen, having a faster vehicle allows you to recover more quickly. So it allows you to keep a schedule much more tightly. So that's just an overview of why some of the reasons we think that electrification is important. I'm going to turn it over to Jay now, and he's going to talk in more depth about the buses specifically. So take it away, Jay.
Hi there. Again, I'm Jay Flynn, the bus team lead for Transit Matters, and I am not a Quincy resident, unlike Rob. However, my ex-wife was, and so if I had $1 for every time I drove along Wallaston Beach, I would be a rich man. Why electrified buses? Well, Rob's given you most of the reasons for it, and we're going to talk about that in this section. If you could go to the next slide, please, Rob. So there are 3 basic types of electric buses. The first is what we call overnight charging buses. They are what Boston has used to this point in time in their initial tests. And they basically charge overnight, kind of like your phone. You know, you charge it once and you go out during the day. And of course, if you use your phone a lot during the day, your charge may not last until the end of the day. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. The second kind is what's called en route charging, and that's the middle bus. And what those are buses that run off wire most of the time, and will only have maybe 1 or 2 spots along the route in which they charge while stationary, usually in a station or a terminus at the other end of a line. And then the third kind, if you see on the right, those of you who spent time in Cambridge or Watertown would probably know our beloved trolley buses. Except these would be trolley buses with a battery charge in them, so that they could run 2/3 of their route off wire. Now, we're suggesting a fair amount of in motion charging for some parts of the city, but in the case of Quincy, our main emphasis is on en route charging. If you can go to the next slide, please, Rob. So again, the overnight charging buses, the charging only happens in the garage. It requires heavier, more expensive batteries. So I was just reading a piece today about people starting to worry now about, you know, with the larger number of lithium batteries, what's going to happen to the recycling of the lithium in, 10 or 12 years. And it also requires a lot more grid infrastructure at the garage site, which is both expensive and unsightly. And I think we're on the next slide now, please, Rob. So overnight charging buses have a particular problem. Probably many of you, if you've gone out at early in the morning on a cold winter's night and you try and start your car and it doesn't want to start, right? Well, at least out here in Sterling, we have that problem. And that's what problem that overnight charging buses are having. That there's 2 issues. One is that they use more power in the winter because they need to keep the bus warm. And at the same time, the cold has reduced the power that's in the batteries. And we've looked at a number of examples. The one we have up on the slide right now is Indigo, the Indianapolis bus system. And they had gotten a bunch of overnight charging buses. We're expecting 275 miles. They got much less than that, and they ended up going back to diesel. So this is a missed opportunity. And this is a common issue in climates like ours. Whereas en route charging solves a lot of that problem. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Rob. So again, we're suggesting mostly a combination of IMC and IRC in the MBTA region. And it depends on the nature of the bus routes in the area. And since if you look on the map that just popped up on the right, you'll see that pretty much every bus that runs out of the Quincy garage comes and goes through Quincy Center. As the old saying was, all roads lead to Rome. Well, in this area, all bus routes lead to Quincy Center. And so while there are small areas where a large number of bus routes go, it's not enough really to warrant putting in wiring. And so we've been recommending that the Quincy Center network be en route charging, that a number of chargers could be put in the station, and that buses could charge, especially during driver breaks. And then if the weather is bad enough and the route is long enough, there might be times where there would have to be an additional charger at the other end of the route. So if you could go to the next slide, please. A number of cities with climates like ours have tried IRC. Worcester is the most closest example, and they had run a combination of overnight charging and IRC overnight at start, and they were dissatisfied, so they brought some IRC in, and they found that their maintenance costs dropped, their cost per mile dropped, and that once they did the IRC, the system worked quite well. Rob, is there a second part of the slide? I'm not seeing the. Okay, I guess there isn't. All right. So there we go. Okay. So as you can see, there's an overhead charger, which is part of the IRC system. Worcester puts them right in. Worcester has a very similar network to Quincy. All buses run into Union Station and out of Union Station. And so they just put a single charger there, and it was capable of charging up a number of buses. And if you see the chart on the right, this is the estimated number of pounds. That's gone up a little bit since this chart was made, and they have actually done well over 2 million pounds of CO2 emissions that didn't happen because of 6 electric buses. So I think that's pretty impressive. If you don't mind, a Worcester kid touting his own city. Next slide, please, Ron. So I talked a little bit about potentially other charging stations. The Montello line, the Hingham line is a strong possibility, as well as the South Shore Plaza line. May or may not. And sometimes it's a question of some parts of the year. For 6 months, 7, 8 months out of the year, the bus might run quite fine without having to charge up again at the other end. Whereas to have a charger there just in case is good insurance. So you won't have to see these things all over the place. They'll just be put in strategic locations, like I say, mostly in Quincy Center Station. We also suggest a number of other improvements, one of which is dedicated bus lanes, or see in this case, it's a combination bus and bike lane, which tends to work relatively well in some other locations, and putting shelters. I mean, ideally at every bus stop, but at least at the major bus stops to start with. And there are a few other things that we think will help make the buses run quicker, because one, it's just a more pleasant experience if your bus ride is 10 minutes instead of 15 or 20 minutes, but also it's like a free multiplier. If buses can run in 10 minutes, that means each bus could potentially run twice as many routes as it did before. And so that service can be counted on to be much more frequent than it was before. The few other things are that the T is in the process of changing the boarding system so that with electronic boarding passes, you'll be able to come on both doors, or in some cases 3 doors in the case of 60-footers. And so much faster loading. And then also they've been experimenting with level platforms so that you can step right into the bus like you do on the T, on the red line. So with all those things done, we estimate that buses could run 15 to 20% quicker. And cleaner with electric buses. So is that my last slide, Rob? I think. Yeah, so at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to the illustrious Ethan Finland, our regional rail lead, to talk about what could potentially happen in the Quincy area on the electrification of rail. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. One last thing. The senator mentioned most of it. I apologize. This just happened yesterday, and that's why or a couple days ago, and that's why it isn't in the slide presentation, and I almost forgot to talk about it. The senator mentions most of the stuff, but right now, if the T does its most aggressive plan that they have suggested, they're talking about the complete electrification of the Quincy bus garage by its second year open. So at the end of the first year of operations, they anticipate having the rest of the electric buses in. We're hoping to push them a little on that to make it all electric from day one. We're not really sure why they would have diesel bus operations there for a year and then kind of rip out all the equipment that they've put in the place for diesels because they're not going to need them anymore. So we're hoping you folks will join us in continuing to push on that, as well as they are still imagining an overnight charging facility, and we are suggesting that the en route charging is a much better bet for Quincy. So take it away, Ethan. Sorry about the taking it back for a minute.
No worries. It's it's an important
Exciting times.
Exactly, exciting times, and important that we get electrification right, because there's a lot of, and I'll talk about this briefly on the rail side, there's a lot of sort of really speculative ideas that are sort of exciting down the road, but we have proven technology that we can start using now. So yeah, thank you to Jay and Rob. So yeah, my name's Ethan Finland. I'm also not a Quincy resident, but I've been to Quincy a couple times and always enjoyed myself. And I'm the regional rail campaign lead at Transit Matters. So just to sort of explain what regional rail is, yeah, it's the idea that we have this large network of rail lines that extend out into the suburbs and into Massachusetts gateway cities, as well as to Providence, and hopefully, potentially in the not too distant future, out to Springfield and Manchester as well, as has been discussed recently. But though these lines only run, or historically have only run in such a way that serves sort of white collar commuters who go into Boston at the beginning of the day during the week, come out in the evening, and there's a very sort of skeletal level of service at all other times, and in some cases with these really wide gaps, and in many cases no service at all on weekends right now. So regional rail proposes to use those assets that already exist and start running and run them more frequently throughout the day, so it's more like a subway. So at least it's somewhere like Quincy, at least every 15 minutes during the day, at all times, and in the further out suburbs, at least every half hour all day in both directions. And one of the things that Rob touched on at the beginning was, why does regional rail matter for Quincy? It's so close to Boston that you've got the Red Line nearby, and it's true that the Red Line is probably always going to be the more frequent option, but regional rail provides a faster alternative, and also it makes Quincy easier to get to for communities on the South Shore as well. So within a half mile of the Quincy Center Station, there are over 11,100 jobs. So getting people from the rest of the South Shore to Quincy, creates more opportunities for employment and more opportunities for economic activity. And it connects Quincy to the rest of the South Shore as well. So how do we get there? Well, there's 5 critical components of regional rail. The first is system-wide electrification. and buying what we call electric multiple unit trains, which we'll talk about shortly, to speed trips and provide more reliable and greener service. High platforms, so like what Jay was talking about with building new boarding stations for buses that let you walk right on. That actually already exists on all of the South Shore commuter rail lines, which is an advantage of having the lines be reopened in the last 20, 30 years. Strategic infrastructure investments to break up bottlenecks, which is very relevant for the South Shore. That frequent service I talked about, and making transfers between regional rail trains and subways and to subways and buses free, and equal fares to the subway, where the subway either parallels regional rail or would if there were a subway line that did, and just cheaper fares overall, with means tested discounts where appropriate. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about how Quincy Center fits in with regional rail. So as you probably know, the 3 lines that serve the South Shore all pass through Quincy, the Greenbush, Kingston, Plymouth, and Middleborough, Lakeville lines. And the advantage there, when you have trains every half hour, is that Quincy can get a train every 10 minutes. So that's helpful. For instance, if you're connecting from a bus, you can time the buses such that they arrive at the same time as the regional trains. So if someone's going right to JFK UMass or right near South Station, they rather than worrying about just missing their train, they can potentially have a timed transfer. And half hourly service to anywhere on these lines, as I said, adds benefits for Quincy and for those residents as well, so they can access Quincy as well as Boston. So as with buses, electrification is critical for all the reasons Rob mentioned. We propose to electrify the regional rail lines with overhead catenary wire. You'll hear a lot of talk about sort of battery trains, and unfortunately, it's sort of the same issue that exists with overnight charging. The range is limited, meaning you have to spend more time charging the further you want the trains to go, and that ties up platform capacity at the end of the line, meaning you can only run so many trains. Whereas overhead catenary wire is a proven technology. It helps trains move more quickly as opposed to the third rail that you have on the red line. For something that's a little longer range, the overhead catenary is just a better system. And based on recent projects in other countries that have been aggressively electrifying their network, including Israel, which I mentioned because they had no electrification of their mainline rail whatsoever, but they were able to do it quite cheaply. So we estimate a range of $180 to $350 million to electrify all 3 of the old colony lines. And you can go to the next slide. So just zeroing in on why electrification is so important for commuter rail. You look at the diesel locomotives you have now. Obviously, they create a significant amount of local pollution. Still greener than a single occupancy vehicle trip, but getting those pollution levels, especially in areas like Quincy, like Dorchester and Braintree that are so close to the highway, reducing as much pollution as you can is great. And what electrification does, not only does it remove pollution from the trains themselves, it makes the trains faster and more reliable because they have multiple motors when you're talking about EMUs, and they're just cheaper to maintain. They're easier to maintain. They fail far less frequently. And if you'll click ahead, Rob, we have the graph that shows just the difference between the T's most reliable locomotives, the newest ones they've gotten, and the low end of EMUs. They're on the higher end, 20 times more reliable than even the T's best locomotives. So by making service more reliable and also faster, you make the rail service more competitive with the Southeast Expressway, which you wouldn't think was hard because, as I'm sure you know, that is the most congested stretch of highway in the state. So once you have a reliable, fast, and frequent option, you can start pulling a lot of traffic off I-93, so that reduces pollution in that sense as well. And just to drive home the point about the faster trips, we drew up this little diagram. If you want to click ahead, Rob. Yeah, sorry, there might be a bit of a lag between when it's getting clicked and when the images are showing up.
Okay.
But yeah, so you can see that the trip to Brockton is 6 minutes faster from Quincy, 14 minutes faster to Middleborough Lakeville, and 10 minutes faster to Bridgewater State. And you'll notice that we have the stations in purple are proposed new stations. So it's possible to get a faster trip with EMUs and with high-level platforms, which already exist, and obviously which the new stations would be built with, even with 3 new stations on the Middleborough Lakeville line. And this is just speaking to that branch alone. You'd see similar reductions in trip time on the Greenbush and Plymouth lines as well. So if you want to go to the next slide. Another key component of regional rail is fare equity. So the trip from Quincy to South Station costs $2.75 on the red line. It's almost $4 more expensive to take commuter rail, even though it runs along around the same distance, and largely partly as a result of that, but also due to the less frequent schedules, only 773 people pre-COVID boarded the commuter rail at Quincy Center per day. And the red line is great, but we all know it's a bit of a slower trip, and so sometimes it does break down. So having an additional option provides additional resiliency, but the price cliff, especially for people who are working sort of service sector jobs downtown, that it's a significant amount of money. So with regional rail, we propose to make the fares to the subway equal and have free transfers. And another benefit of electrification, because you're saving money on the maintenance costs, you bring down operating costs. So people will say, well, that's just going to make it more expensive to run if you cut the fares. But part of the answer there is, electric trains have a high capital cost, high upfront cost, but they save you money over time. And the other piece that's important is frequency. If you want to go to the next slide. So like we've talked about a couple times now, historically the schedule, if you want to go, say if you wanted to go from Quincy to Brockton, well, you could hypothetically get a train at 6:42 or 7:37, then no train for almost 3 hours. And this isn't the exact schedule, but as you may know, this is not an exaggeration. Gaps that are like 2.5 to 3 hours long were common. Now, fortunately, in response to the ridership drop post-COVID, pardon me, the T's actually moved to what we call more of a clock face schedule. And clock face schedules are at memorable intervals throughout the day. So if a train runs every 10 minutes, for instance, you can get a 6 o'clock, a 6:10, a 6:20 going into Boston. You want to make that Brockton trip, you have an option every 30 minutes. We're not at that point yet, but the introduction of clock face schedules, which are about every 2 hours for each branch, is a significant step forward. And regional rail improvements will allow us to get these even more aggressive schedules. So it becomes really like an express red line. Now, there is one particular issue impacting Quincy and the South Shore lines, and that's the fact that much of the track through Dorchester and Quincy, much of the right-of-way is only single track. This, especially with diesel, just because of the lower reliability and the slower speeds, severely limits maximum possible frequency to all 3 lines. Now, double tracking the whole thing, ultimately, we believe is necessary to get the frequency improvements that are warranted to serve Quincy as well as some of the growing communities further south. But it would be an expensive project requiring hundreds of millions of dollars and would have a long lead time. But fortunately, in order to run trains every half hour to each branch, it's possible to get there with electrification but also just double tracking Quincy Center Station and realigning the red line tracks further north. And potentially, just for resiliency purposes, potentially double tracking JFK Station as well. The reason why is because you can time trains to meet at stations. Because whenever you have trains going more than one direction, they pass each other. If you can time those meets at stations, it's just much more reliable, and that gets easier with electrification. And we did draw up a small graphic just showing how that sort of interim fix would look. Maybe it might not have copied over. Another advantage is that it's the fact that they're doing the air rights process around Quincy Center makes it advantageous to start planning this now. So the parking garage that was there for several years is gone. So there's less weight on the station. So now's the time to design and build a double track station. But if something gets built before that's done, it gets much harder. So we do have an opportunity here to make service more reliable and more frequent, but there is potentially somewhat of a narrow window. So yeah, that concludes our presentation. Just wanted to thank QCAN and the Quincy Library for having us, and I'll hand it back to Rob.
Okay. All right, great, thank you. So that's our overview of where we feel things are at and where they should be going. So now we're just going to open it up to questions. And I see Joe's already posted something.
Thank you, Rob. Before we start the Q&A, I want to give you guys a 30-second breather and thank some people. First of all, I'd like to thank my partner in crime, Faye Strigler, for helping, actually really driving this event from the QCAN side. She'll be saying a few words after the Q&A, but I wanted to thank her myself. I wanted to thank Shelley Dean for being here tonight. She's one of our best friends at City Hall, and she showed up when we sent the invite, and I know she'll have lots of good input on this. So thank you for being here, Shelley. I want to thank some co-sponsors. Irene Lutz is here from Quincycles, and I'm sure Quincycles is going to be extremely interested in the presentation tonight and have some great input as well. And I wanted to thank from Quincy for transformative change, Cindy Sign or Kind. I'm sorry, I forget if that's a C, a hard C or not. And Feta Aid, again, sorry if I'm butchering your name, for being here from QFTC. And I also want to thank Ann Mahoney, Counselor at Large, who is here. She might have just dropped off because I know she had an 8 o'clock wall. But she also told me to pass along thanks to Transit Matters for the presentation. And of course, I want to thank one more time Senator Keenan for being here and participating. I've really enjoyed everything so far. I'm looking forward to getting to the questions. So with no further ado, you can submit your questions via chat, and we'll pop in and ask them. Or if you want to do it live, under the reactions menu, there will be a raise hand feature. At least it is on Windows. It might be in different spots depending on your version of Zoom, but you can always chat me if you're having trouble doing that, and we can figure it out. So with that, I did have one question I want to start with. It's from QCan's own Julie. She said, let's see, I have to scroll back. She had questions about the timing of the charging at the bus stations, whether or not it would be much different than the breaks that the drivers get at this point. And on top of that, I also want to ask, could you tell me one more time the difference between in motion and in route charging? Anyone? Jay, is that for you?
There you go. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. The first question, I'll answer the second part first. So the difference is that they both have some method, usually on the roof, to charge during the course of the day. In motion means, as I say, think of the trolley buses over in Cambridge, or the Green Line. You know, it's got the pantograph up against the wire. It's just that because of the battery technology, they only have to run about a third of the time under wire. So, for instance, a bus could run from Harvard Square to Watertown as the 71 under wire, and then become a Kenmore bus and run the 57 off the wire, and then come back and get charged again. So it would give us the opportunity to run a lot of buses on a small amount of wire. We think a good candidate for that is kind of the Ruggles to Nubian Square area, where there are so many buses that makes sense to do. Whereas the en route has to be stationary to charge. So, for instance, if you had a bus running from Quincy Center Station to Ashmont Station, they would have chargers at either end, and depending on how they were running on the schedule, what kind of weather it was, so what kind of draw they were having, they could potentially charge at either end. However, buses don't necessarily need to charge every time they go in and out. It's usually at the most once an hour. So I think the second part of the question was how often they have to charge. Was I right in that? So I'll just give you, for instance, a good sized battery, but not the largest battery on a bus, is about 5,000 kilowatt hours. And as you probably know from using phones or any other chargers, you really get maximum battery life by never going below 20 or above 80. And so that gives you a usable range of about 300. Is it 300 or 3,000? 300 kilowatt hours. That's what it is. I'm sorry. I was a history major. I was told there'd be no math, but I get a lot of math at this job now. An aggressive, but not unduly so, one of those in-motion chargers has a hourly rate of also 300 kilowatt hours. So basically, if a bus left the garage with a full charge in the morning and was out for, say, 12 hours, if it got on the charger once every 1 5-minute period every hour on average, it would come back to the garage with a full charge, which is not necessarily what it has to do, if there are no facilities in the garage. Although there are places, for instance, Dayton, Ohio, which is going all IMC, has no chargers in its garage because they charge on the wires over the course of the route. And that's another advantage of IRC, which we didn't mention, was that you're kind of diffusing out the charging rates over a much larger number of places, usually at places we already have the infrastructure for, like existing red, orange, and blue line stations, and it's spread out over the course of the day as well. not in a short period of time. Now, an overnight charging bus usually takes between 4 and 5 hours to charge. And unfortunately, like with some of the runs they made with the 5 buses they were testing, they found they were barely getting through the morning rush, and they would have to go back to the garage to charge again to be potentially ready for the afternoon rush. Well, that's fine with some buses. You know, there are more buses used during rush hours than peak hours than non-peak hours, but you have to have at least half the bus system reliable all day, or you have to have more buses, and that's not an inexpensive thing. So I hope that's a question.
Well, thank you, Jay. We're going to take a live question. Sarah, if Sarah Belfour, if you're up.
Sure. So, yeah, I live in Quincy, and so I would normally, walk or take the bus to the T station myself when I'm using public transportation. But I was driving by Quincy Adams and was kind of shocked to see that parking costs $10 for a daily rate, or $9 if you're using the app. And that seems like a lot more than it used to be. And just wondering like what your recommendation would be for for commuter rail parking lots and T parking lots, kind of given some of the equity issues. And I'm thinking if it were me, I might think, well, maybe I'll take my chances. If I don't have to be in Boston all day, or depending on where I'm going in Boston or whatever, maybe I'll just take my chances and see if I can get street parking, rather than paying so much money at the station and then still having to pay for the cost of, of the subway and everything as well. So I'm kind of curious what your recommendations would be on parking costs.
Clean, reliable, frequent, nice to ride buses, so that you get on the bus at your near your home and you don't take your car to it. But that's because they tore down the Quincy garage, of course, there's fewer spots, so they can afford to charge more because enough people will pay it to park. But generally speaking, when there are places that have the amount of density, we try to push people towards either conventional transit, or in some places microtransit, rather than park at the garage. Because that's a failure on the part of the buses. There are a lot of people that will never get in a bus, but will take the train or the red line all the time. Well, we need to make the bus as pleasant an experience as the red line is, or as commuter rail is, and then people will use it to get to the stations. That's how it was done back in the day and ran successfully until we disinvested and turned to cars.
We have some more chat questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Rob. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to talk to, so when you think about the Quincy Adams garage, so that's what we call it's called a park and ride, right? That's back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the park and ride model where you drive your car to a transit station, that was a very common trend in that era. Part of the idea behind regional rail is actually kind of moving away from that a little bit. It has its place. Park and ride stations definitely have their place, but many of the people who are, okay, so I'll use myself as an example. I grew up around New Bedford and Fall River and Taunton, down that way, right? When I was in high school and I wanted to go into the city, I would drive to the Quincy Adams station, right? Park there and then go into the city. Now, it would have made a lot more sense for me to just drive to Middleborough, get on the commuter rail at Middleborough, and use that to get into the city, right? It's a lot less driving. But many of the people who go into the Quincy Adams garage, they might be driving up from Plymouth, from Abington, from Weymouth, from places that actually have commuter rail stations. But because the commuter rail is not frequent enough and it's not reliable enough, they prefer to drive all the way. They fight their way up Route 3 or up Route 24 and to get to that garage. So part of the regional rail idea is if we make what we call the commuter rail now run a little bit more like a subway, right? Every half hour, all day, you know, then the demand for that type of park and ride service might be less necessary, because people who live in, say, Whitman, they can just get on the train in Whitman and they know it's going to be reliable and fast, and they don't feel the need to get in their car and drive to Quincy in the first place. Yep.
Awesome. I'm going to combine two questions here because I think they're kind of related. Anna and Roman and Dirk ask, they want to know your thoughts on buses that charge overnight but have auxiliary propane or diesel heater. Are they a good alternative to IRC? And also, can you explain, are the buses off the shelf at some place, or are these custom for our system?
Okay. Again, I'll handle the second question first. Dayton has almost exactly the same bus we would want in a perfect world for IMC, and numerous places have iron. In fact, the buses that they just tested as overnight charging buses in Boston had the capability of being IRC. They're built to the same standard. It's just a question of they put a set of rails on the top that a charging mechanism comes down and attaches to. So as far as the IRC, a very standard bus. As far as the diesel heater, I know that up to 40% of the power charge on cold winter nights goes to heating. Now, that's not an exact statement, but I mean, a bus with a diesel heater could use as much as 20 or 25% as much diesel as a regular diesel bus would. So you're saying for every 5 buses, say, you've got an old school diesel bus running the route, the equivalent of it. And there are some places in which that makes sense, although we're concerned that they're talking about diesel as opposed to, say, bio mass of some kind, either or used vegetable oil, things that can be generated without using hydrocarbons. And also diesel has, even in the sense of being used as a heater, has really bad particulate matter emissions. So it's a better step, but not as good a step as all electric.
Thank you. I missed a question on the chat first. Do you also see them putting charging at the Braintree bus stop as well? Robert says he sees buses like the 225 and 226 stopping there for long periods of time in Weymouth Landing.
Yes, that's exactly the kind of place we would tend to expect chargers to be. Places where buses stop for a while on a regular basis, and they tend to be termini, places where, or it could be where the drivers have a place to take care of their needs, if you know what I mean.
I do. And a follow-up to our very first question. So if a bus comes in on 20% or less and needs to be charged, how long would they need to sit there to get the charge to do the whole route again?
Just to do, depending again on the weather, the temperature and such, and the route, of course, say 5 to 7 minutes would be enough to get them out and back again. Usually you won't get to that point. You'll have opportunities to top up during the day, and because of some buses being peak and other buses not being during the peak. So the ones that go off peak could maybe make it through the whole morning without having to charge at all. And they'll have an opportunity to go charge for, say, a half an hour once they come off the peak service, and then the same thing in the evening. Whereas some buses will do that 12 hours, but driver stops for lunch, driver stops for breaks. Those are all opportunities to get them under the charger for a fair amount of time.
That's great. And once again, I'd like to have a live question. Would Cindy Sine, I think I got it better now. Thank you for who corrected me. Like to ask her question at this point.
Thank you, Joe. My question is in regards to the action plans. What are the action plans that residents and commuters can take now to get Quincy to go full electric and not do the year of diesel that's currently planned? How can we start getting that ball rolling?
Sure. Well, luckily they've announced 90% of it. One thing though is we're going to have to keep their feet to the fire to meet the goals they've already talked about, and not backslide on those, but then also to push them to be more aggressive. I think in part, a lot of it depends on what happens with the American jobs plan, the infrastructure bill that's just started going through the process. That, as I was saying actually a little bit before the meeting started, if it goes through as President Biden has suggested, which of course is a big if, you don't know what it's going to look like when it comes out, if it comes out, but it looks like about 700 to 750 electric buses for Boston in about a 7 or 8 year period. Part of it is the cycles. Buses have about a 12-year cycle life, and they've bought buses as early as like last year and the year before, and so it's probably going to be about a 12-year process unless they get a little more aggressive on it to get rid of every bus. But they're talking in terms of 100 buses to 150 buses a year, just so they'll have a natural cycle that they can keep doing year after year after year.
Jay, it looks like you froze.
Ethan,
Argument is maybe let's be a little aggressive about it, even though it'll make it a little, may not be around when climate change gets really, really bad. But I've got a son, and I want him to have a place that he can live in. And so, I'd like to see the buses all be electric by 2030. I know that makes me a little more aggressive than some, but that would require 150 buses, almost 200 buses a year from here on out, which I don't think is crazy. I think is very doable. And the garages. Now, I want to throw this out, and I don't want to take up too much time, but right now the Quincy garage is estimated to cost nearly $400 million for about 135 spaces. Springfield, which is far, far away out in Western Mass, just built 150 car bus garage for $54 million. And so that's a big question we have, is why are they costing so much? The senator mentioned a $4 billion plan to replace the garages. And part of our ask is, why is it taking that much? And I'm sorry, it's a little dark. I'm in my car at my son's house because, life. Here we go. There's a light again. And so, yeah, we're thinking for what they're spending on Quincy, they could replace and upgrade every garage in the system. So the argument they may not have money to do that is a big question for us.
well, that's a good segue to another question we had in the chat. I'll just read it verbatim. How do you think the T will actually find the funds to replace all those bus barns? Isn't only a portion of the needed funding committed so far?
Yeah, well, right now they've committed the building funds necessary to get Quincy up and running, 1 year's worth, as well as planning money for Arborway. That's the next garage they want replace and upgrade. And part of it is, I think we're going to keep on our job, and back to one of the prior questioners about what the ask is, what people can be doing, is we all need to be holding the T's feet to the fire and say, why is this stuff costing so much money? It's just, you know, we're not the cheapest place in the world to build, but Springfield is still in Massachusetts. You know, it's, let's say there's a 50% premium to build here. Well, that's 75 to 80 million. Maybe there's 100% penalty to build here. That's 100 million, you know, it's not 400 million. So that's a big part of what we do at Transit Matters is point out when the emperor has no clothes, you know, and that's what activists can do, is not only keep pushing them to meet the commitment of buying electric buses, but also the right kind of electric buses and right pricing the facilities. So.
Well,
I think it's also, go ahead.
Go ahead, please, Ethan.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's also important to keep in mind here that the T needs new bus storage anyway, right? So just in order to meet you know, demands for more frequent service, they're in the middle of a redesign process, which is probably, if it's done well, is gonna say what we all know, right? The buses don't come frequently enough. So that means you need more buses total, and you need more places to store them. So let's keep the pressure on them to say we need more buses, we need more garages, and we need to make them electric from day one.
Well, to arm us with the ammunition to do you know, some lobbying or some pressure, there's been a couple questions about can we have the slides? Are they available? Can they be posted? Also, specifically, Robert asked if you could post the schematic of the interim solution for double tracking the commuter rail bottleneck in Quincy online. So whatever, or can you point us to where we can find stuff to help us with our communications, or is there any other things that we can get to help us with that from you?
Just on the slides and the schematic, yes, we're happy to make those available. We can I don't know if you all have an email list. The schematic, great. So yeah, Rob, maybe if you want to pass the slide deck along to the team, that'd be great. And then on the regional rail end of things, we will actually have a report on making these fixes to the old colony lines coming out in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. And I know the bus team is working on a bus electrification report that should be coming out pretty soon.
Pretty soon.
Okay, great. So yeah, so yes, there are some. We'll make these resources available, and there will be more coming very soon.
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm familiar with transitmatters.org. Is there anything else that you can point us to for how people can find you and keep up with you?
That's probably, I mean, that webpage is probably the best place. I can also put my contact info, send you my contact info if you want to post that in the chat. I'm happy to
Social media as well. I believe we have Instagram.
Oh, right.
We're on Twitter. I believe there's a Facebook as well.
Yes.
Awesome. And as we wrap up, we had I can't remember if I did mention Irene Lutz from Quinn Cycles, and I just wanted to put her on the spot and see if there's any comment about the bus barn, the trail, how all this fits in with Quinn Cycles ideas for Quincy. Specifically, the bus barn will also have a trail for bikes. Do you know anything about that, Irene? I will find you and unmute you. Wow, Zoom is going crazy. Here you are.
Hi. Thanks for hosting this. It's been really really informative. I would love to talk about the bus barn having a multi-use path that will give pedestrians and bicyclists access to the MBTA station via the crossing at the Deco complex. So there'll be a path from Liberty Street down through, and it'll be wide enough for a multi-use path, not just pedestrians. So hopefully conflict will be minimal. And there will be a bike cage. There is a bike cage being installed on the Bergen Parkway side of the station. Unfortunately, not on the Independence side. So we need to work on the T to get that installed. And then just today, Center Street has the initial paint down for new bike lanes that will give people bicycle access to that low stress connection into the station. So it's exciting things happening over there for bike transportation access.
Awesome. I believe that was our final inquiry, and it's good timing. I'd like to thank everyone personally, but I'd also like to turn it over to Faye for some closing remarks. Hold on, Faye, I'll let you unmute.
Okay, thanks again. I just what Joe said. Thanks to the library. Thanks to Brian and
Faye, don't forget that you got to look at your. Yep.
Oh, what?
Don't forget you got to look forward with your microphone.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks to the library. Thanks to Transit Matters. Thanks to Senator Keenan. Thanks to Quincy for transformative change, and everyone in the audience. Electric transportation is a really hot issue right now, from the electric buses that we're discussing here to the electric semis that I've heard about, to the charging stations on poles and Melrose, and to the Quincy's first city electric vehicle at the Quincy Fire Department. And I just want to ask people to keep your eye on communications from Transit Matters and QCAN about MBTA updates and ways that you can all participate. And good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.